In the heart of a burning city, as an empire teetered on the brink of collapse, a single voice cut through the chaos. It was not the voice of a general, a nobleman, or a priest. It was the voice of a woman who the world's elite knew as a whore, a street performer, a social outcast. Before the most powerful men in the world, men who were actively planning their escape, she stood unmoving, and the words she spoke would not only shame an emperor into action, they would save his throne, redefine his reign, and echo through 1,000 years of history. Her name was Theodora, and she was the empress of the Eastern Roman Empire. But to understand how she found herself in that room, holding the fate of civilization in her hands, you have to understand the gutter from which she came. You have to walk the grimy, merciless streets that forged her and witness the acts she performed just to survive, because the story of the empress begins with the story of the Roman prostitute. Our story doesn't begin in a palace, but in the filth and noise of the hippodrome of Constantinople, the roaring heart of the Byzantine world. It was a place of high-stakes chariot races, political intrigue, and brutal public spectacles. And here, a man named Acacius served as the bear-keeper for the Green faction, one of the two powerful political and sporting groups that dominated the city. He wasn't a man of note or wealth. His job was to manage the animals used for entertainment and executions. He was, in the grand scheme of the empire, a nobody. And he had 3 daughters. Theodora was the middle child. Her world was not one of tutors and silk dresses. It was the smell of sawdust, wild animals, and the roaring, drunken crowds. This was the highest station she could have ever expected to know. And then, it got worse. Her father died suddenly. In an instant, Theodora, her sisters and her mother were left with nothing. No income, no protection, no status. In the rigid hierarchy of the Roman world, they were less than nothing. They were destitute. Her mother, whose name is lost to history, was a woman of action and desperation. She quickly remarried, but her new husband wasn't given her old husband's job. It went to another man. In a frantic bid for survival, she staged a desperate spectacle. She took her 3 little girls, including a very young Theodora, dressed them in garlands like sacrificial lambs, and sent them into the hippodrome during a race. They walked into the heart of the Green faction's section, the very people her father had served. The girls fell to their knees, a silent, public plea for charity, for mercy, for the job that was their only hope of staying off the streets. The crowd watched, the leaders of the Greens watched, and they did nothing. They turned their backs on the family of their loyal, deceased servant. The rejection was absolute, public, humiliating. But someone else was watching. The Blue faction, the sworn rivals of the Greens, saw an opportunity. In a calculated act of political theatre, they took pity on the family. They gave Theodora's new stepfather a minor post. It wasn't much, but it was survival. Theodora would never forget it. She would never forget the cruelty of the Greens, and she would never forget the calculated kindness of the Blues. The world had shown her its true face, a brutal game of power where loyalty was worthless and survival belonged to the cunning. It was the first and most important lesson of her life. With her family now aligned with the Blues, Theodora and her sisters were thrust into the only career path available to them: the stage. But the Byzantine stage was not a place of high art. It was a world of mimes, burlesque, and performances, so lewd they are difficult to describe even today. Actresses, by law, were branded with sat infamia sot infamy. They were legally in the same category as prostitutes, pimps, and gladiators. They could not marry a person of rank. They could not press charges in most courts. Their testimony was considered worthless. They were, in the eyes of the law and society, living ghosts. They existed for the pleasure of others, but they themselves had no rights. This was the world Theodora entered as a child. She started as a supporting character for her older sister, Camito, who had already become a well-known performer. Theodora was the little slave girl in the comedies, the one who took the mock beatings and carried the props. But she was a quick study. She learned that to survive, she had to stand out. And to stand out in the depraved theatre of Constantinople, she had to be more daring, more shocking, and more shameless than anyone else. The contemporary historian Procopius, who despised Theodora and wrote a scandalous consacret history grant to slander her name, gives us a venomous but detailed account of her performances. While his hatred makes him an unreliable narrator, the details he provides paint a vivid picture of the world she inhabited, and the lengths to which she had to go. He describes her as having no shame, performing acts on stage that shocked even the debauched audiences of the capital. He writes of her comedies where she would be publicly slapped and beaten, a form of physical comedy that blurred the lines between performance and abuse. But her most famous act, the one that cemented her reputation, was a grotesque and blasphemous retelling of the myth of Leda and the swan. In this performance, she would lie on her back on the stage, nearly naked, while attendants would scatter grains of barley over her body. Then, geese, specially trained for the purpose, would be brought out to peck the grains from her flesh. This was not art. It was a spectacle of human degradation for the entertainment of the masses. It was a display designed to be talked about to create a name for her, in a city of millions. Beyond the stage she was a prostitute. This was not a choice. It was an expected part of being an actress. She worked in the brothels of the city, entertaining anyone who could pay. Procopius claims she would attend lavish dinners with wealthy men, and at the end of the night, she and the other actresses would service the entire party, sometimes dozens of men. He recounts with vicious glee stories of her insatiable and athletic sexuality, portraying her as a demon of lust. But beneath the slander we can see the truth of her existence. She was a commodity. Her body was not her own. It was a tool for survival in a city that would have otherwise let her starve. She learned about men in these encounters, not the sanitized, noble men of court poetry, but real men. Their vanities, their insecurities, their greed, their secret desires. She learned how to read them, how to manipulate them, how to give them what they wanted, and in return, get what she needed. The brothel and the stage were her university. Her education was in the practical, brutal mechanics of human nature and power. Every humiliation was a lesson. Every degradation was a whetstone, sharpening her mind, her wit, and her resolve. She was at the absolute bottom of the social ladder, a place from which no one was ever supposed to escape. But Theodora was not like anyone else. Her big break, or what seemed like it, came when she caught the eye of a man named Hysibulus. He was a man from Tyre, appointed as the new governor of a province in what is now Libya. He was on his way to his new post and needed a companion, a mistress to accompany him. He chose Theodora. For her, this was a monumental step up. To be the exclusive companion of a high-ranking official was a world away from the brothels and the stage. It meant fine clothes, regular meals, a taste of a life she could only have dreamed of. She left Constantinople with him, traveling across the Mediterranean to North Africa. For a time, she lived in relative luxury. She was no longer performing for drunken crowds. She was entertaining powerful men in private, learning the language of politics and administration from the inside. She listened to their conversations, she observed their dealings, and she absorbed everything. She was seeing how the empire was actually run, not from the bottom up, but from the top down. But this life was built on the whim of a single man, and men's whims are fickle. After some time, for reasons we don't know, perhaps he grew tired of her, perhaps her sharp tongue and intelligence began to annoy him, perhaps he simply found someone new. Hysibulus cast her out. He abandoned her, penniless and alone, in Alexandria, Egypt, one of the great cities of the empire, thousands of miles from home. This was a moment of absolute crisis. She was a foreigner, a disgraced woman with no friends and no money. The fall was brutal. She was forced back into her old trade, prostitution, just to eat. She was back in the gutter, but this time she was in a strange land. It would have broken a lesser person. It could have been the sad, final chapter in her story. But it was in Alexandria, at her lowest point, that something profound happened. Alexandria was a cauldron of religious debate, a center of theological thought and conflict. It was here that Theodora encountered a different form of Christianity, a form considered heretical by the mainstream church in Constantinople. This was monophysitism. The core of their belief was that Christ had a single divine nature, not two natures, human and divine, as the official doctrine stated. To the powers in the capital, this was a dangerous, destabilizing heresy. But to its followers, it was the true faith. The monophysites were often the poor, the marginalized, the people of the eastern provinces, who felt ignored and oppressed by the capital. In them, Theodora found a community. She found people who, like her, were outsiders. She was embraced by their patriarchs and bishops, men like Severus of Antioch and Timothy III of Alexandria. They saw something in her. Perhaps they saw a woman of immense intelligence and charisma. Perhaps they simply offered her kindness when she was most desperate. Whatever the reason, she embraced their faith. This conversion was not just a spiritual awakening, it was a political one. It gave her a purpose beyond mere survival. It gave her a cause, a network of allies, and a new identity. She was no longer just Theodora the actress. She was Theodora, a believer in a cause that defined the lives of millions. With a renewed sense of self, she began the long journey back home to Constantinople. She didn't have the money for direct passage, so she worked her way back, town by town across the Near East. She was no longer the scandalous performer. The sources say she returned to the capital and set herself up as a humble wool spinner in a small house near the palace. It was a respectable if poor living. It's likely she was also using her old skills, perhaps as a more discreet, high-end courtesan, using the connections she had made. But she was different now. She was patient. She was strategic. She had seen the world. She had known luxury and destitution. She had mastered the art of survival on the lowest rungs of society, and had glimpsed the workings of its highest offices. She understood the poor and the pious, the perverts and the politicians. She was a woman forged in fire, waiting for her moment. And in Constantinople, a new power was rising. A man who would change her life and the world forever. His name was Flavius Petrus Sebaceus Justinian. He was the nephew of the current emperor. Justin I, a coarse illiterate, but effective soldier who had risen through the ranks to seize the throne. Justin was old and had no children. His chosen heir was his nephew, Justinian. Unlike his uncle, Justinian was highly educated, deeply pious, and obsessively hard-working. He was the true power behind the throne, a man of boundless ambition who dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire to its former glory. He spent his days in the palace, poring over legal texts, architectural plans, and military reports. He was brilliant, driven, and utterly dedicated to the concept of the Roman state. But he was also, by all accounts, a man who lived in a world of theory and bureaucracy. He was a man who understood laws better than he understood people. He was formal, ascetic, and somewhat isolated within the gilded cage of the imperial court. And then he met Theodora. How exactly they met is a subject of historical debate. It was almost certainly through her connections with the Blue Faction, the political group that had saved her family years ago, and which Justinian himself strongly supported. Perhaps he saw her at a political gathering. Perhaps a well-connected friend arranged an introduction. The details are lost, but the result is not. From the moment he met her, Justinian was utterly, completely, and irrevocably captivated. What did he see in her? The court was filled with beautiful, well-bred aristocratic women. But Theodora was something else entirely. She possessed a worldly wisdom that no palace-raised woman could ever have. She had a razor-sharp wit, a profound understanding of human nature, and a survivor's iron will. She was his opposite. He was the sheltered theorist. She was the master of practical reality. He knew how the empire was supposed fought to work. She knew how it actually worked in the streets and brothels. She was not intimidated by his power. She could talk to him as an equal, challenge him, and fascinate him with her stories and her insights. To the ascetic work-obsessed Justinian, she must have seemed like a force of nature, a vibrant, intelligent, and courageous soul who brought the real world crashing into his cloistered existence. He fell deeply and obsessively in love. He wanted to marry her. And this was not just a problem, it was an impossibility. Ancient Roman law, still in effect, explicitly forbade any man of senatorial rank from marrying an actress. It was a law designed to maintain the purity of the ruling class, to keep women like Theodora forever separate from the levers of power. Justinian was not just a senator, he was the heir to the imperial throne. Marrying Theodora would be a scandal of epic proportions. It was unthinkable. His uncle, the Emperor Justin, was against it. The entire court was against it. Most importantly, the Empress herself, Euphemia, was vehemently opposed. She saw Theodora for what she was, a low-born actress, a prostitute, a stain on the imperial dignity. As long as Euphemia was alive, the marriage was impossible. Justinian pleaded, he argued, but the Empress would not yield. And so Justinian and Theodora waited, their relationship deepened. He made her his official mistress, showering her with wealth and granting her the rank of a patrician, a high honor. But it wasn't enough for him. He wanted her as his wife, his partner, his empress. Then in the year 524, the Empress Euphemia died. The single greatest obstacle to their union was gone. With Euphemia gone, Justinian pressed his advantage. He went to his aging uncle, the emperor, and used all of his influence, all of his powers of persuasion, to do the unthinkable. He convinced Emperor Justin to repeal the ancient law. He didn't just find a loophole. He had the law itself wiped from the books. A new edict was issued, declaring that if an actress had reformed her ways and lived a respectable life, she could be legally married to any man, regardless of his station. The law was, in essence, written for one woman, Theodora. It was a stunning demonstration of Justinian's devotion and Theodora's influence over him. Even before their marriage, he was willing to change the legal foundations of Roman society for her. Soon after, in 525, they were married in a grand ceremony. The former street performer, the outcast who had performed unspeakable acts to survive, the woman branded with legal infamy, was now the wife of the heir to the Roman Empire. 2 years later, in 527, Emperor Justin died. Justinian ascended to the throne, and Theodora, the daughter of the bear-keeper, was crowned Tunt Augusta Stunt, the most august empress of the Roman Empire, in the magnificent cathedral of Hagia Sophia. She had reached the absolute pinnacle of power. Her journey from the gutter was complete, but her work, the work that would define her legacy, had only just begun. As empress, Theodora was not content to be a silent, decorative figurehead. She was Justinian's most trusted advisor, and in many ways, his co-ruler. Her name and image appeared alongside his on mosaics and in official decrees. When he passed laws, they were often issued in both their names. Justinian, who trusted few people, trusted her completely. He valued her intelligence, her political acumen, and her unique perspective. While he focused on the grand strategy of reconquering the lost western provinces and codifying Roman law, she focused on the social and religious fabric of the empire, and her first priority was protecting women like the one she used to be. She had never forgotten the world she came from, the world of exploitation and powerlessness. And now, she had the power to change it. She spearheaded a series of revolutionary laws that we would now call women's rights legislation. She passed a law making rape a capital offense, punishable by death, and the seizure of the perpetrator's property. She outlawed forced prostitution, and she empowered magistrates to hunt down and prosecute pimps and brothel keepers. She didn't just punish the exploiters, she cared for the victims. She established a massive convent, called the Sot Metanoia Sot, or Repentance, in a former palace on the shores of the Bosphorus. It was a safe haven for over 500 former prostitutes, a place where they could live in safety and dignity, free from the men who had abused them. Critics, like Procopius, sneered that she had to lock the gates to keep the women from running back to their old lives. But for many, it was the only sanctuary they had ever known. She also expanded the rights of women in divorce cases, gave them the right to own and inherit property, and granted mothers guardianship over their own children, rights that were almost unheard of in the ancient world. Theodora was using her imperial power to wage a war on the very system that had created her. Her influence extended deep into the dangerous world of religious politics. She never forgot the monophysite faith she had adopted in Alexandria. It was still considered a heresy, and its followers were often persecuted by the state. While Justinian, a staunchly orthodox Chalcedonian Christian, officially condemned the monophysites, Theodora became their secret protector. She played a double game with breathtaking skill. Publicly, she stood by her husband's orthodox policies. Privately, she used her vast network of agents and her personal influence to shield monophysite bishops and monks from arrest and exile. She hid them in her own palaces, funded their monasteries, and maneuvered their allies into positions of power within the church. This created a strange, and sometimes tense dynamic in the imperial palace. The emperor would issue an edict persecuting the heretics, and the empress would be working behind the scenes to undermine it. Was it a genuine conflict between husband and wife? Or was it a brilliant, coordinated strategy? A way for the imperial couple to placate the orthodox establishment in the West, while simultaneously maintaining the loyalty of the monophysite, heavy eastern provinces like Egypt and Syria. Many historians believe the latter. Justinian and Theodora were playing good cop, bad cop on an imperial scale, a complex political dance designed to hold their diverse and fractious empire together. Theodora's private faith had become a powerful tool of statecraft, but to believe she was only a champion of the oppressed would be a grave mistake. Theodora was no saint. The same streets that taught her compassion also taught her to be ruthless. She had a long memory for those who crossed her, and her political instincts were lethal. Her greatest rival was a man named John the Cappadocian. He was Justinian's Praetorian prefect, a man of immense power, responsible for taxation and the administration of the empire. He was brilliant and effective, but also notoriously corrupt and cruel. And he hated Theodora. He saw her as a low-born upstart and resented her influence over the emperor. He constantly whispered against her in Justinian's ear, trying to poison their relationship. Theodora knew he was a threat, and she decided to remove him. She couldn't attack him directly. He was too valuable to Justinian. So she laid a trap. She worked through John's daughter and a trusted friend, Antonina, the wife of the great general Belisarius. Antonina approached John, pretending to be disloyal to the empress. She convinced him that she would help him in a plot to overthrow Justinian and seize the throne for himself. John, blinded by ambition, took the bait. He agreed to a secret meeting in a palace near Chalcedon to discuss the details of the coup. But Theodora had arranged for two of Justinian's most loyal officials to be hiding in the room, listening to every word. When John began to speak of his treason, they sprang from their hiding place. A violent scuffle ensued, and John barely escaped with his life. But he was finished. The evidence of his treason was undeniable. Justinian was forced to strip him of his office and his wealth, and exile him to a monastery. Theodora had surgically and ruthlessly eliminated her most dangerous political enemy. She had proven that she was as skilled at palace intrigue as she was at legislating reform. She was a master of power in all its forms, both creative and destructive. For 5 years, Justinian and Theodora ruled over a period of immense activity and reform. They were building a new Roman Empire, a Christian empire, with a new legal code and a new vision for the future. But the changes they made came at a cost. Justinian's ambitious projects, his wars, his buildings, his legal reforms were expensive. John the Cappadocian had been ruthlessly efficient at raising taxes, and his replacement was no different. The populace began to grumble. The people of Constantinople, who had once cheered Justinian, now felt the heavy hand of his administration. The resentment simmered, waiting for a spark, and in January of 532, that spark was lit. The trouble began, as it so often did, in the Hippodrome. Following a riot after the chariot races, several members of both the blue and green factions were arrested and sentenced to death for murder. 2 of the condemned men, one blue and one green, miraculously survived the hanging when the scaffold broke. They took refuge in a nearby church. This should have been a minor incident, but it became a flashpoint. The factions, normally bitter rivals, saw a common enemy, the government. They united. A delegation went to the emperor to plead for the lives of the 2 men. Justinian, perhaps arrogantly, refused to be swayed. It was a fatal miscalculation. The next day, when Justinian entered the Hippodrome for the races, he was not greeted with cheers, but with a terrifying, unified chant. The crowd roared a single word, Nika. It meant conquer or win. It was the cry of the factions, but now it was turned against the throne itself. The Nika riot had begun. Chaos erupted. The city descended into madness. Mobs poured out of the Hippodrome, their factional hatreds forgotten in a shared rage against the regime. They attacked the city prefect's headquarters, setting it ablaze. They swarmed the city. A tidal wave of destruction. They were not just a rabble, they had a political agenda. A group of powerful senators, who had long resented Justinian's power and his low-born wife, saw their chance. They seized control of the mob, directing its fury. Their goal was to overthrow the emperor and install one of their own, a nephew of a former emperor, on the throne. For 5 days, Constantinople burned. The mob torched the Senate House, the baths of Zeuxippus and the great church, the Hagia Sophia itself. Smoke choked the sky. The screams of the dying echoed through the streets. Justinian and Theodora were trapped in the great palace, protected by their loyal Gothic guard, but effectively prisoners. The city was lost. From the palace windows, they could hear the roar of the crowd in the Hippodrome as they crowned their new emperor. The military was divided, its loyalty uncertain. Justinian's top generals, Belisarius and Mundus, had only a small, ethnically diverse force of foreign mercenaries at their command, hardly enough to take back a city of 500,000 people in open revolt. The situation was hopeless. Justinian's nerve broke. He convened his council. The decision was unanimous. They had to flee. Ships were being prepared in the palace harbour. The imperial treasure was being readied for loading. The emperor of the Romans, the man who dreamed of restoring the empire of Augustus, was about to turn and run, to sail into exile and obscurity. And it was in that moment of ultimate despair, as the generals and courtiers planned their escape, that Theodora stood up. All eyes turned to her. She was calm. Her voice did not tremble. She looked at her husband, at his terrified advisers, and she delivered the speech that would change the course of history. The historian Procopius, who was likely present in the palace, recorded her words. "My lords," she began, her voice cutting through the panic, "the present occasion is too serious to allow me to follow the convention that a woman should not speak in a man's council. Those whose interests are threatened by extreme danger should think only of the wisest course of action, not of conventions." She looked directly at Justinian. "As to the belief that a woman should not be a leader in times of crisis or show courage beyond what is natural to her sex, I believe the present moment, above all others, does not allow for such distinctions. For my part, I consider flight, even if it brings us to safety, to be quite useless. Every man who is born into the light of day must sooner or later die. And how can an emperor ever allow himself to become a fugitive?" Her voice rose, filled with a defiant passion that shamed the fear in the room. She pointed towards the imperial robes Justinian was wearing. "I will not be separated from this purple. May I never be seen without this purple robe, and may I never live to see the day when those who meet me do not call me empress." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she delivered the final, immortal line. "If you, my husband, wish to save your life, there is no difficulty. We are rich, there is the sea, and yonder are the ships. But consider whether, once you have escaped to a place of safety, you will not find that you would gladly exchange that safety for death." And then, the ultimate indictment of their cowardice, the words that would echo forever. "As for me, I agree with the ancient saying, royal purple is the noblest shroud." Silence. Theodora sat down. A wave of shame and renewed courage washed over the council. Her words had been like a lightning strike, electrifying the room. She had reminded them not just of their duty, but of their identity. They were not cowards to be chased from their own capital. They were Romans. Justinian, his resolve forged anew by his wife's iron will, stood tall. The plan to flee was abandoned. The order was given. They would fight. He turned to his generals, Belisarius and Mundus. The plan was desperate, almost suicidal. Belisarius would take his small force of mercenaries and attack the rioters in the hippodrome through one entrance, while Mundus would lead his troops through the opposite gate, the gate of death. It was an all or nothing gamble. Belisarius and his men crept through the smoking ruins of the city to the hippodrome. They forced their way in. The crowd, tens of thousands of them, were packed into the stadium, celebrating their victory and hailing their new emperor. They were caught completely by surprise. Panic erupted as Belisarius's armored troops began to cut them down. Then, from the other side, Mundus's soldiers charged in, sealing the exits. The celebration turned into a slaughterhouse. There was nowhere to run. The soldiers, loyal to Theodora's words and Justinian's command, showed no mercy. They killed everyone, blues, greens, men, women. For hours, the killing went on. When it was over, the floor of the great hippodrome was slick with blood and piled with corpses. As many as 30,000 people were killed in a single afternoon. The Nika riot was over. The rival emperor was captured and brought before Justinian. He was executed on the spot. Justinian's throne was secure. Theodora had saved the empire. But the cost was a massacre on a scale the city had never seen. The throne was saved not just by courage, but by a terrifying and brutal display of force. The royal purple was indeed a noble shroud for thousands that day. A shroud bought with their own blood, to preserve the power of the sovereigns they had dared to challenge. In the eerie quiet that followed the massacre, the power of Justinian and Theodora was absolute. They had faced the ultimate test and had not only survived, but triumphed. Their opposition was crushed, their authority unquestionable. From the ashes of the old city, they began to build a new one, a capital grander and more magnificent than ever before. Their crowning achievement was the new cathedral. they built on the site of the one destroyed in the riots. It was a building that defied the laws of architecture, with a dome so vast it seemed to hang from heaven by a golden chain. They called it Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. For the next 1,000 years, it would be the largest and most glorious church in all of Christendom, a permanent, breathtaking monument to their reign, a reign that had almost been extinguished in fire and rebellion. Theodora continued to be the power at Justinian's side. She guided his policies, managed the intricate politics of the church, and met with foreign ambassadors. She was, in every sense, his equal. Her past was never forgotten. Her enemies still whispered about her, but they did so from the shadows, terrified of her power and her retribution. For 16 more years, she reigned as empress. Then in the year 548, at the age of only 48, Theodora died. The sources say it was from cancer. Justinian was devastated. He had lost his wife, his partner, his most trusted advisor, the anchor of his life. He wept for her with a grief that was profound and public. He would go on to rule for almost 2 more decades, a long and lonely reign, but he never remarried. Her presence was always with him. He continued to pass laws that she had championed. He continued to protect her monophysite allies, and her name remained in the official decrees. In the mosaics he commissioned, she is always there, by his side, her gaze direct and unflinching. A woman of immense power and presence, draped in royal purple. Her legacy is one of the most complex and astonishing in all of history. How do we remember her? Was she the salacious power, hungry manipulator described by her enemies? Or was she the courageous, brilliant champion of the poor and oppressed? A proto-feminist saint? The truth, of course, is that she was all of these things. She was a survivor. She was a woman born into a world designed to crush her, who used every tool at her disposal. Her body, her wit, her intelligence, to claw her way out of the gutter. And when she reached the pinnacle of power, a height no one could have imagined for her, she did not forget the world she came from. The Roman prostitute who became an empress did more than just save her husband's throne. She showed the world that power could be found in the most unlikely of people, and that the voice of a single, determined outcast could be strong enough to save an empire.